This is the second part of a two-part video on how to develop tunes, how you can take a tune on a journey or transform it entirely during the course of a piece. You can skip around both these videos. Part one was more the very simple things that you can do to change how a tune sounds without really changing the notes or the rhythm. Part two is some of the more advanced tools in the kit, which involve you changing the rhythm or the notes. Might sound slightly technical, but you probably find that you've got these ideas in your mind already. You might already do them in your compositions. These kind of things are generally what musicians mean when they talk about melodic development. Let's get started. Keep the rhythm, change the notes. This is such an incredibly important part of how melodies develop, where the rhythm of the tune remains exactly the same, but the notes change. So, famous example, Happy Birthday. Happy birthday to you. Da, 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 da. 4 different lines of pitch, but they all have the same rhythm. You see this all over music of every stripe. If I take the tune that Freya wrote, she's a 7-year-old. If you haven't seen our previous video, she's the 7-year-old who offered us this tune. So I just got to make something up, and that's what she gave us. And in the previous video, we've made up dozens of examples using her tune. So I could take that rhythm, find a sound that I want to use. I could do that exactly the same rhythm, but different notes. That's the kind of thing we're talking about. Check out this example by Mozart, where he uses this tiny little motif. I'll go to a piano sound. That little motif, he just uses it hundreds and hundreds of times in this example. It moves to the bass, the middle, same rhythm, different note choices. This example, it's a longer example here with a song form rather than a classical piece. You can see here, I've got this tune which goes ba 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 ba. Phrase tune. The answering phrase da 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 ba ba. So I'm just changing that little hook. It's a tiny little difference in the tune. So for normal. Change the notes, keep the rhythm. It's a huge thing. With most melodies, they're made of smaller component parts. If you've got 20 notes, you can usually break it down into little riffs of 4, 5, 10, 2 sometimes notes. With Freya's, we've got lots of little motifs. So that could just be a motif, that. This could be a motif, and this definitely is. And I could play them in a different order instead of going ba 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 da ba ba da ba da ba 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 ba. I could do it, say, in reverse. I could go ba 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 da ba 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 da ba 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 da ba 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 da ba ba, and start to cut between those different cells or those different chunks of music. And as I started to do in that example, you might find that you start developing parts of that tune that you've cut up. So, and then you start to take you somewhere else. In other words, your tune just doesn't repeat and constantly repeat itself. It starts to grow and develop. Breaking your tune down is a pretty fundamental part of writing music. And most musicians are just doing it naturally, and then they're not thinking, oh, I must break my tune down into component parts. They just, it's just something that kind of comes naturally when you're making up your material. So take a really famous song, Heard It Through the Grapevine by Marvin Gaye. There's this little ba 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 at the end of every line. That little chunk of music just gets repeated. It's in the intro as well, but it's also da 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 ba 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 ba. That little motif, it just happens again and again in the piece in different ways. And that's just one example of tens of thousands that I could give you. Or another more modern example, Amy Winehouse's Rehab, where she does that. I said no, no, no. That little ba ba ba. Again, she uses that in different parts of the verse. So with this example, I've just taken just this little motif of Freya's. And I've just done a workout where everything is just that motif, and I've almost created a new section. So this is a sort of piano, sort of classical thing. That looks like this. So I haven't even used the second half of the tune at all for that. So you can experiment with having a balance of either quite radical use, like that one example that I just showed you, of really only using one tiny bit, or you can be quite subtle and just change things a little bit. Sequences. Sequences are simply chord progressions that have been tried and tested. They're usually following a pattern. So a classic one is the cycle of fifths. Here I'm going to use Freya's tune again, using this chord sequence where I'm going G minor, C7, F, B flat, E flat, A flat, then D. So I'll play it to you now with the tune in it. Again. Just using the first 6 notes of Freya's tune. That kind of thing. Just taking the tune on a little journey with that classic chord sequence going on. Same notes or pitches of notes, but a different rhythm. This is another quite a big one. Once you've set up a kind of a melodic shape, like ours is, I could easily change the length of some of those notes. But you'd still feel that it sounded like it belonged, that it was still Freya's tune. I could do something like... So I haven't changed the notes, but I've changed the rhythm quite radically. And obviously you can do it radically or subtly. And you might find that it's a way of generating a whole new section, and that's what I've done with this example here. I've done the melody, instead of doing it square, I'm doing it more swung. So there's a swung version of exactly the same tune. Yes, and you might find that your tune starts to change its character as you do that. So that immediately, as soon as I made it, a swung rhythm started to sound jazzy. You might find that you'll do other things and it'll start to sound like a tango or whatever. Obviously, for some tracks, that's going to be way too radical a change. You're not going to want to develop your music so that it turns from being a waltz into a tango. But it is worth being aware of how powerful an effect it can be. Another example, quickly. A waltz, again, using exactly Freya's notes, but changing the rhythm radically. Change the downbeat or the upbeat. So this one, it's a great little trick where you offset the rhythm. You move just a beat or half a beat or 3 beats forward or back in the bar with your tune. It's a really common thing. You hear it in a lot of jazz, but in all styles, actually. Here's an example I've done with Freya's tune. 3, 4, 1, 2. Don't know if you can hear that, but instead of it going bum, da-da-da-dum, da-dum, da-dum, I've just moved it by 1 beat along, so it's going da-da-da-da-dum, da-dum. You get that different feel. here's another bit of the same tune, and I've just, instead of offsetting it by a whole beat, I've offset it by half a beat. Here we go. All Freya's material there, but just offset so it sounds syncopated. Inversion. So all this means, it's a fancy word, but all it means is that when a melody goes up, you change it so that it goes down, and vice versa. It's as simple as that. Here's an example. I've taken Freya's tune and I've literally played it upside down. So instead of sounding like, it now sounds like this. And what I found when I did this, by inverting it, it made me want to choose different chords altogether. It's a trick that you can use in any kind of music. You don't even have to stick with the rules. It's basically another version of keep the rhythm and change the note. So I would advise experimenting with it. And if you have to tweak a note here and there, fine. Play the tune backwards. This is sometimes known as retrograde, but it just means play the tune backwards. Here we go. Can you see what's going on there? It's a bit harder to hear, isn't it? Because that da-da motif is now going... But that really is Freya's tune backwards. It's actually not a bad tune. Da-da, da-da, ba-da, 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 ba-da. It's a pretty decent tune. And once again, it's a thing that I keep on saying. Once you do one of these tricks, it starts to make you think in a different way, and the tone of your music starts to change. That example seems to have a little bit more tension in it than some of the other ones that I played with Freya's tune. So I don't know whether you found that easy or difficult to hear, but it's certainly a trick that you don't see so much, playing a tune backwards in pop songs and even film music. It's a rare one, but it is worth trying out. And the main reason it's rare, I think, is because it's difficult to hear. And you could argue that what's the point of doing something that the audience can't hear you're doing? That's for you to decide whether that's a good thing to do or not. Do both. Play it backwards and invert it. Make it go up when it goes down. So with Freya's tune, that would be this. I feel like you can kind of hear that that's related to Freya's tune. I'm not sure if you agree. Here, once again, I just tempted to put different chords to it. Has a different feel. Different chords want to work with that tune. And of course you could join together those two. If I played the inversion and the retrograde inversion next to each other, I'd have an even longer passage of music. Here they are together. So this is just about making notes exactly twice as long as they were previously. It's actually quite a common thing that you hear, and we've sort of shown you that in a way, but if I did this example here, you can hear how I've taken Freya's tune, and instead of it being this sort of skipping along thing, put it to these chords here. Okay, you get the idea. It's a very, very simple trick. Always worth trying. You might find it in a bass line, perhaps, halfway through a piece. Could be a bridging passage. Just play the melody twice as fast. As I said before, when we were talking about tempo, it makes a great deal of difference, but you could have a piece which is going and then you set up that idea in the listener's head, and then you double the tempo. Make a little motif out of something which is twice as fast. This one's called Stretto. This is where you make more and more instances of a particular motif come closer and closer together. So here's something using the first 6 notes of Freya's tune. Okay, so that is the riff, do 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 do, but also there, do 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 do, there, da 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 da. It's just happening a lot there at the end and not at the beginning of the tune. I'll play it once more. There's another instance. There's another instance. There's another instance. There's another instance. There, there. They're just constantly piling up until you get a much, much richer sound. So that's a technique you often find at the end of pieces, but there's nothing stopping you trying it earlier on. Imitation, where someone just repeats what someone else has already played. I mean, this just happens all over the place in R&B songs, in Latin music. We've already heard it, in fact, in the example and sequences where that little riff got imitated by different voices in the piano. More complicated is canons. That's a thing like London's Burning or Row, Row, Row Your Boat, where one person starts singing a tune, they carrying on singing something else, and then the second person joins in after maybe a bar or 2 bars. You've all heard a canon. Now, the first thing you need to do when you're making a canon is work out whether your tune actually wants to be a canon. And you might find, as we're about to find, that it doesn't, unfortunately. So with Freya's tune, this example here, I've just done a 3-part canon. So each part just starts after a bar. And here we go. This is what it sounds like. Well, it does sort of sounds okay, I think. But it doesn't really lock together like something like London's Burning locks together. And the reason for that is because there's no real chord sequence going on in that piece. It's just a bit G minor-ish. You might find with a canon you need to tweak some notes, and that's what I've had to do. I mean, Freya's tune just doesn't want to be a canon, but this is the best that I can offer, is by having a 2-chord sequence where every bar just goes C minor, G minor, C minor, G minor. And that sounds a little bit better. So every note agrees with that chord sequence. In fact, I could play that chord sequence underneath and it would make sense. So here we go. I'm not suggesting playing that chord sequence. I'm just demonstrating the point that the canon is following that chord sequence. And it's exactly the same with something like London's Burning. That chord sequence is happening all the way through the whole piece. That's how you make a canon. There are lots of videos on YouTube if you want to explore this. Not all of them are great in my opinion, but there are some good ones, and I put a link in the description below to one which I thought was really helpful. One thing that I'm going to mention is that you can stack up canons, motifs working across each other in kind of experimental ways. There's a composer that I particularly like called Alfred Schnittke who does a lot of this. Here's an example of a piece that I wrote using a piece that was originally a 3-part canon, and I've stacked it up with 7 singers. So that's a piece called The Silver Swan. And finally, there's fugues, and that's basically has the same form as a canon, but instead of repeating exactly the same thing, when you hear the repetition, it's on a different key. It'll repeat usually there. So that one goes. So you can see that the second time I repeated it there instead of there. That's how fugues tend to work. It's a beautiful thing. I think I love a fugue. So we sort of did this in the previous video, but just be aware of it, that your piece doesn't need to be broken down into crisp sections. It can evolve. The most simple one would be a fade out. That's kind of a metamorphosis. Obviously, you could do the opposite. You could build gradually over a long period of time. And when I say over a long period of time, that could be 2 minutes or 4 minutes. It doesn't have to be over the course of a bar. Or you could build your accompaniment pattern going from steady chords to something faster, for example, or from more flourishing to more straight, or from more staccato to more legato. So one form of slowly evolving would be a kind of hypnotic repetition. This is made most famous by composers who they don't usually call themselves minimalists, but other people call them minimalists, where it's a classic way of making a small amount of material go a long way. So their famous names are people like Steve Reich, Terry Riley, Philip Glass. But lots of people have been influenced by this style of writing music over the years. You hear it a lot in film music. To demonstrate the idea, we'll start by using a little clapping motif that I've made up very much in the style of something that Steve Reich might have done. And we'll put it through a really simple process. I'm going to ask Kit, who's sitting over there, to learn this clapping motif. And it goes like this. Cold cup of tea, cold cup of tea, one. Cold cup of tea, cold cup of tea, one. Cold cup of tea, cold cup of tea, one. He's just going to do that. I'm going to have a different motif, but it's hardly different. Mine goes like this. Cold cup of tea, one. Cold cup of tea, cold cup of tea, 1, 2. Cold cup of tea, cold cup of tea, 1, 2, 3. And then I start again. That's all we're going to do. But you'll see that the piece seems to move, even though we're just set in our little patterns. The piece keeps on evolving. So let's do that now. So, Kit's going to start, I'm going to join in. Or no, maybe we start all together?
Start together, yeah.
Start together, here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we could keep going for ages because the patterns are different lengths. The piece can keep rolling. So I can do exactly the same thing as we did with the clapping tune with Freya's tune. So here you go. If you look at the score, if you can read music, you can see I've done a canon, but each line loses time at the end of each phrase at a different amount. One of the lines is losing 2 beats every repetition. One is losing 1 beat. One is losing half a beat. So we're never hearing exactly the same thing, even though the piece is made out of the same music. So I can play you this. Sounds like this. Get the idea, and it's just kind of evolving. It's also getting louder. So there you go, sort of hypnotic repetition in a minimalist kind of style. Now, I'm not saying that you have to always have a mathematical form like that by adding or taking away certain lengths of music. There are loads of other processes you could go through it. But if you do find this an interesting sound, then do look up the minimalists and have a listen to what they've done with these ideas. I'm going to say one more thing about this style, is that you'll notice that it goes away from the tension and release style of lots of the music that we've listened to so far, where you have a chord and then you have that's a home chord, and then you go away to tension and then you come back and you release. That kind of minimalist style is much more floaty. There's not really chord changes as such, so it might lead you in a completely different direction. Deconstructing your music into cells. Now, you could say, and you'd probably be right, that I've kind of covered this before when I talked about how to cut your music into little chunks and do something with it. But I'm talking about radically destabilizing the music by doing this here. The idea is to not even sound like you're doing a natural melody, but you're being real cut and paste. You might just take one little tiny bite-sized chunk and put it next to a really weird one, which almost doesn't belong, and collage your material in that way. We're getting into more experimental territory. Although I say that, one of the first people to do that was a guy called Stravinsky. And that's over 100 years ago that he started experimenting this way. And you hear, there's lots of other people who have collaged music. David Bowie collaged his lyrics. Someone like Jay Dilla in the hip-hop world, he collaged little chunks of music and put them next to each other in unusual ways. Here's Freya's tune. You can see that I've got these little cells that I've used. This is you've actually heard all this material already. I've got my one from the Inversion, and this one. And then this one is from, so these are all different cells. And then I've got this one, which is from the Retrograde piece. It's the accompaniment, and it sounds like this. That's just a little bit of material. And this is the upside down ending of Freya's tune. And then finally this one. Okay, which is from the, what is it from? It's from the Retrograde Inversion. So I've done a lot of processes here, but ultimately it just leaves me with these 5 tunes that I put together in different ways, and I've done it in a kind of Stravinsky sort of style. So it sounds like this. Let's Freya's tune. So I'm not sure if Freya would recognize her tune there, but it's all made out of her stuff. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I've cut it into tiny little events, which you can follow in the score. I say it was a technique pioneered by Stravinsky in the early 20th century, but there's no reason why you couldn't use exactly the same technique and in fact the same material in a completely different style. So here's a sort of more dubsteppy. You get the idea. You can hear the huge journey that I've taken Freya's tune on, from being this humble little thing that sounded like this. I think I've made at least 25 pieces of music out of her tune, which really sound different to each other. And depending on what kind of music you like, I think you will be able to make an enormous amount of material out of that idea that you're getting stuck on. Try out some of these 28 things, and I'm pretty sure you'll get results.